2,700 years ago, the Samaritans accused the Judeans of falsifying parts of the Torah to favor Jerusalem. The Samaritans are the remnant of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. According to Israeli historian Shlomo Sand, it wasn't until the 19th century, when the Bible started being viewed as a history book, that Jews began to identify themselves as an ethnicity rather than a religion. We hear the debates about who is entitled to the land of Israel, and many may feel torn between the theological and legal debates. I'm not trying to persuade you to take one side or another. Rather, the purpose of this video is to share some lesser examined history so that you can decide for yourself. Let's start at the beginning, or at least the beginning of this tangled family story. A man named Jacob, later called Israel, is fleeing from his twin brother Esau after tricking him out of his birthright and blessing. Jacob's life is a soap opera of deception, love, and rivalry. He falls for Rachel but gets tricked into marrying her sister Leah first. Now we've got two wives in one household, Leah, the unloved but fertile one, and Rachel, the beloved but initially barren beauty. Needless to say, Leah and Rachel were in a heated competition for most of their adult lives. Leah bears son after son, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and you get the idea. Rachel, desperate, gives her maid Bilhah to Jacob, who has Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah does the same with her maid Zilpah, adding Gad and Asher. Finally, Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin. The wives are vying for Jacob's affection, using their children as scorecards. While we can't watch the family dynamics play out on a reality TV series, it's reasonable to conclude that the sibling rivalry and resentments were deeply ingrained in their childhood, especially considering what we know about human nature. Fast forward, Jacob favors Joseph, giving him that famous multicolored coat. The brothers seethe with jealousy. Joseph's dreams of them bowing to him are just fuel on the fire. The brothers plot to kill him, but Reuben talks them down to selling him into slavery instead. They dip the coat in goat's blood and break their father's heart with a lie. Sibling rivalry doesn't get much darker than that, but this family feud sets the stage for the entire history of ancient Israel. These 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. After the exodus from Egypt, they conquer Canaan under Joshua. For centuries, they're a loose confederation, squabbling like siblings. Also recall that Reuben, the oldest, had an affair with his father's concubine, and Joseph, the favorite, indirectly gets the double portion because Jacob adopts his son Ephraim and Manasseh. Jacob says that Ephraim will be the greater of the two brothers. Adding to that, the Ark of the Covenant is kept in Shiloh, which makes Ephraim's territory the spiritual center of the 12 tribes and adds to the resentment and jealousy between the brothers and their uncles. Benjamin, who was once the baby of the family, was the smallest of the 12 tribes and might have felt like it was unfair that he had to share his inheritance with his nephews Ephraim and Manasseh. Possibly it's this bitterness that leads to Benjamin becoming the new Sodom, because after the rape and killing of a Levite, Benjamin refuses to hand over the perpetrators and instead goes to war with his brothers and nephews. The Benjamites had the most elite warriors, which is why 26,000 of them were able to defeat 400,000 soldiers from the family's tribes. But on the third day, they lured Benjamin's tribe out of their city and ambushed them, killing all but 600. Since the Benjamites were nearly extinct, the brothers suggested that they should find some wives in Shiloh, Ephraim. Now, whether the evil behavior continued in Ephraim's kingdom or the disobedience and arrogance was the product of entitlement is uncertain. But later, nearly all of Ephraim's tribe was wiped out in a civil war with the people from his brother's territory. Psalm 78 describes Ephraim's fall from grace, but many scholars argue that Psalm reflects a later, potentially post-exilic perspective, or that it was heavily edited during the reign of Josiah or Zedekiah to serve as political propaganda supporting the Judean monarchy. The Samaritans maintain that Shiloh was an illegitimate temple and that Mount Gerizim is where the ark was supposed to be housed. But because of the Cain and Abel dynamics between these tribes, we can't know for sure who's telling the truth. Then comes the united monarchy. Saul, David, Solomon. Glory days, right? The first temple in Jerusalem built by Solomon, but even here cracks start to appear. Now the story is that the kingdom was a united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon, but whether the united monarchy existed, and if so, to what extent, is a matter of ongoing academic debate. Many scholars agree that the biblical portrayal of this empire's opulence is most likely an exaggeration, and possibly even fabricated during the Babylonian Exile, transforming David and Solomon from local folk heroes into rulers of international status. Fast forward to King Solomon's death, and the generational resentment kicks up again. When Solomon dies around 930 BCE, his son Rehoboam ignores the 10 tribes' pleas for tax relief. Boom, the kingdom splits. The northern 10 tribes form the kingdom of Israel, with Samaria as its capital, and the southern 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, consolidate under the kingdom of Judah, centered on Jerusalem. Why the split? Historians point to economic grievances, but let's not ignore the family echo. Just like Jacob's son, these tribes had built-in jealousies. The north was more prosperous, the south claimed David's royal line of the temple. The northern kingdom thrives at first, but falls into idolatry. In 722 BCE, the Assyrians invade, deporting elites and scattering the population. These are the 10 lost tribes of Israel. But not all vanish. Some remnants stay, intermarrying with Assyrian settlers. They become the Samaritans, who build their own temple on Mount Gerizim. They claim to be the true Israelites, preserving the original Torah without what they see as Judean edits favoring Jerusalem. Accusations fly. You changed the holy site from Gerizim to Jerusalem. Jealousy between brothers, north versus south, now codified in rival scriptures. Meanwhile, the southern kingdoms of Judah last longer, but meet its own doom. In 586 BCE, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar destroys the first temple, exiles the elites to Babylon. This is the famous Babylonian Exile. But it's not total. Many Judeans stay behind, possibly up to 75%. During and after the exile, they compile much of what becomes the Hebrew Bible, emphasizing unity and Jerusalem's centrality, perhaps to counter the Samaritan claims. Cyrus the Persian conquers Babylon in 539 BCE and allows a return. A second temple rises in 516 BCE, but tensions simmer. Returning exiles see locals, including Samaritans, as impure. Ezra and Nehemiah enforce strict separations, even forcing divorces from foreign wives. Jealousy evolves into exclusion, who's a true descendant, who's faithful. Now keep in mind that Ezra wanted to retain the special privileges and autonomy under the Persian Empire, but in order to do that, he had to create a distinct identity from the locals and keep a buffer zone between his Egyptian rivals. The quote-unquote foreign wives argument was really a dispute between the Israelites who had stayed behind and adopted neighboring languages versus the returning exiles who wanted to create their identity and perceived the remnant as impure. Now, anyone who has lived in a multi-generational immigrant community knows the dynamics between new arrivals and later assimilated generations. This rivalry is another plausible explanation for the otherization of the Judeans who had stayed behind. Enter the Hellenistic era. Alexander the Great conquers in 332 BCE, spreading Greek culture. Some Jews assimilate, others resist. The Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE against Antiochus IV leads to the Hasmonean dynasty, independence but with a twist. The Hasmoneans forcibly convert neighbors like the Idumeans, Edomites, descendants of Esau, talk about family irony, and destroy the Samaritan temple in 128 BCE. Sibling rivalry? Well, now it's conquest and forced assimilation. By the Roman era, starting around 63 BCE, divisions deepen. Sects like the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes argue over law and temple. Herod the Great, an Idumean convert, renovates the temple but is hated as a Roman puppet. Jealousies flare into revolts. The Great Revolt in 66 CE ends with Rome destroying the Second Temple in 70 CE, amid famine, infighting, and massacre. Another revolt under Bar Kokhba in 132 to 135 CE crushes any hope. The temple's gone. Jerusalem, renamed Aelia Capitolina, scattered communities remain, but the era of temple-centered Judaism ends. Now here's where it gets fascinating and even more controversial. For centuries after the temple's destruction, Judaism wasn't seen as an ethnicity tied to ancient bloodlines. It was a religion, one that actively proselytized. From Yemen to North Africa, Spain to the Caucasus, conversions were common. The Khazar kingdom in Eastern Europe famously converted en masse in the 8th century, likely contributing to Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry. This link is debated by scholars. But according to historian Shlomo Sand in his book, The Invention of the Jewish People, the idea of Jews as a single ethnic group, descendants of those ancient tribes, exiled and wandering, is a modern invention. Sand argues that there was no mass exile after 70 CE. Most Jews stayed in the land, many converting to Christianity or Islam over time. The Diaspora narrative, crafted in the 19th century amid European nationalism. Historians like Heinrich Graetz started treating the Bible as literal history, forging a Jewish nation to mirror rising nation states. Sand points out that before the modern era, Jewish primarily referred to a religious adherent, someone who followed the faith rather than an ethnic or racial kin group. Judaism was historically proselytizing religion, much like early Christianity and Islam. Mass conversions built diverse communities across the world, Berber tribes in North Africa, Yemenite kingdoms, and famously the Khazar elite in Eastern Europe who adopted Judaism around the 8th and 9th centuries. Modern genetic studies often reveal mixed ancestries among Jewish populations, reflecting this history of conversion and intermingling rather than a single unbroken line straight from the biblical Jacob. The 19th century shift from seeing Judaism as a religion to framing Jews as a distinct ethnic nation helped fuel Zionism's emphasis on a shared historic homeland and return from exile. But according to Sand, it often overlooked how Judaism actually spread, through voluntary adoption and conversion, not solely through descendant or a mass ancient expulsion. Sand isn't denying Jewish identity or continuity, he's challenging the idea of an inherent ethno-national essence, arguing it's more a product of modern nationalism than ancient biology. Of course, Jewish communities faced repeated expulsions and persecutions throughout history, from medieval Europe to later periods in various lands. Religious differences played a major role. As a visible minority refusing conversion, Jews were often scapegoated during crises like plagues, wars, or economic downturns. But economic factors were frequently intertwined and sometimes dominant. Take the classic example of the medieval moneylending. In Christian Europe, the church strictly prohibited usury, the charging of interest on loans, among Christians, viewing it as sinful exploitation. Muslim societies had similar religious bans on riba or interest, yet growing trade and commerce created huge demand for credit. Jews, as non-Christians outside the church jurisdiction, could lend at interest to non-Jews under their own interpretations of halakha. This didn't make them the only lenders, but it pushed many Jews into finance as one of the lucrative professions open to them, especially when guilds excluded them and land ownership was restricted. Over time, this created resentment. Debtors hated paying interest, rulers borrowed heavily, then turned on lenders to cancel debts or seize assets, and stereotypes flourished. A famous parallel is King Philip IV of France in 1307. Deep in debt from wars and lavish spending, he owed massive sums of money to the Knights Templar, who had become powerful bankers. Rather than repay, Philip accused them of heresy and other shocking crimes, pushed to get the order resolved, and seizing their wealth to erase his obligations. Jewish community faced similar dynamics in multiple expulsions. Economic envy, royal opportunism, and religious prejudice often combined. Money wasn't always the sole driver, but it amplified tensions in ways that echoed through those ancient family jealousies, competition over resources, status, and survival. Now fast forward to the 19th century. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 marked a pivotal moment in the Zionist project as British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour pledged support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, framing it as a blend of imperial strategy and religious sentiment. The declaration not only legitimized Zionist aspirations amid World War I, but also set the stage for settler colonial policies that disregarded the indigenous Palestinian population, portraying the land as sparsely inhabited or redeemable through European-style development. Historian Ilan Pappé critiques this as part of a broader myth-making process where Zionism was cast as a liberal liberation movement rather than a colonial endeavor, enabling the displacement and ethnic cleansing that followed. The declaration's ambiguity promised rights for non-Jewish communities while prioritizing Jewish claims, fueled tensions that echoed ancient rivalries over land and identity, much like the biblical family dynamics that evolved into the modern ethno-national conflicts. Building on this foundation, the Havre Agreement of 1933 represented an alliance between Zionist organizations and Nazi Germany, facilitating the emigration of some 60,000 German Jews to Palestine, along with partial asset transfers. Many critics view the agreement as a betrayal, particularly since the deal undermined the anti-Nazi boycotts, while others posit that it saved lives amid rising persecution. Candidates for immigration under the deal had to pay 1,000 British pounds, which is the equivalent of about $100,000 today, so it's unsurprising that only the elite immigrated. Linking back to Balfour, it exemplified how international endorsements and desperate migrations intertwined to transform Palestine's demographics, paving the way for Israel's establishment in 1948 through what Pappé termed systematic ethnic cleansing. In the modern era, these historical threads illuminate the challenges of sustaining Israel as a secular ethno-state. As critiqued by Pappé and Shlomo Sand, Pappé argues that Israel's settler colonial origins perpetuate myths of entitlement, justify ongoing occupation, apartheid, and denial of Palestinian rights, rendering true democracy impossible without de-Zionizing the state. Sand complements this by deconstructing Jewish ethnicity as a 19th century invention, viewing Israel as an ethnocracy that discriminates against non-Jews while claiming secularism, leading to inherent racism and exclusion. Both scholars emphasize the paradox. A state founded on ethno-religious myths struggles to embody secular equality, fostering internal divisions and external conflicts. Transforming it into an egalitarian binational entity, they suggest, requires dismantling these invented narratives for a future based on universal rights rather than exclusive claims. And finally, I want to close out with some insights from the Third Testament that explain the historical failure of the ancient Israelite spiritual mission. Now, keep in mind that chosen in this context doesn't mean favorite. The Third Testament explains, "If I formed a people and lavished them with gifts, it was not so they could exalt themselves and humiliate others, but rather for them to be an example of submission before the true God and an example of brotherhood among men. I chose this people so that they would be an instrument of my will on earth and carrier of my revelations. So they would invite everyone to live within my law, and so that all of humanity would become the only people of the Father." As a side note here, I notice that a lot of Christians have fallen into this trap of exclusivism and believing that they're the only saved ones. I think these verses are helpful for self-correction. And he goes on to say, "If this people have suffered greatly in spite of being the chosen, it is because they believed the heritage was only for them, that their God could not have been a God for the pagans, because they regarded other people as strangers and did not share with them what the Father had entrusted to them. If I separated them for a time from other people, it was because I did not want them to become contaminated with wickedness and materialism. However, when they stuck obstinately to their egotism and regarded themselves great and strong, I demonstrated to them that their power and their greatness were false, and I permitted other nations to descend upon them and reduce them to servitude. Kings, pharaohs, and Caesars were their lords, when I had offered to be their Lord. The Father, in his infinite love, again manifested himself to his people to give them their freedom and remind them of their mission. And during this period, I have come to deliver to them my lessons of love, and it is only my gaze that is able to discover among mankind the sons of Israel, whom I am calling and congregating so that they may receive the light of the Holy Spirit." These messages were received from 1866 to 1950, and even he refers to the land of the state of Israel as Palestine. He says, "During this era, Palestine has not been the witness of my manifestation because it is not a specific place that I come to seek, but rather your spirit. I search for the people of Israel of the spirit, not of blood. For the people who have the spiritual seed that throughout all the eras they have received through my charity." This is about the separation of the Jewish people into earthly and spiritual creeds. It was necessary that the Father, after his parting, strike from the hands of his people on earth the land which had been entrusted to them from the time of their ancestors. From some of them it was taken as a restitution, and from others as a reward. For that land of Canaan, that beautiful Palestine of past times, was prepared by me only as a symbol of the true promised land of the Spirit. And upon stripping that people of those possessions, the materialist Jews roamed over the face of the earth, and on the other hand, the faithful, those who always sensed my presence, remained awaiting my will, without pain at having renounced that inheritance from the past, knowing that the Father had conceded to them a new grace, the inheritance of his word, the divine word, and of his sacrifice and his blood. They lived fully in the third era, and in those days my gaze finds my people of Israel still divided into two parts. One materialist and rich by the goods of the earth for their own restitution and shaking the foundations of the earth with their power, for they have placed the strength, the talent, and the grace that the Father poured out over their spirits in service to themselves, their ambition, and their greatness. See how that people has given proof of their strength, even within their materialism, in their sciences, their will, and their intelligence. Within, they guard anger for the hunger, the enslavement, the humiliations they suffered. And today, arrogant and strong, they have risen up to humiliate other peoples, to make them tremble at their strength and to dominate them. Today, they are the satiated ones, and they are pleased to see the millions who are hungry, and the great people of slaves, slaves of their money, of their strength, of their science, and of their ambition. I also see the other part of my people, the faithful and determined, those who have always known how to feel my presence, those who have always recognized my coming to men, those who have believed in my revelations and who have obeyed and complied in spite of all. When I speak of my people of Israel, the people of God, I refer to those who have brought a spiritual mission to earth, those who have made known my law, those who proclaim me, and those who are faithful, those who proclaim the existence of the living God, those who perpetuated the seed of love, and those who know how to recognize in the Son, the Word, and the presence of the Father. These are those that form the people of God. That is Israel, the strong, the faithful, the prudent. Israel, that is my legion of soldiers, faithful to the law, faithful to the truth. Those who persecuted my prophets, who lacerated the heart of my envoys, those who turned their backs on the true God to bow before idols, who denied and mocked me, demanding my blood and my life, those, although by race called Israelis, were not the chosen people, were not of the people of the prophets, the legion of the enlightened, or the faithful soldiers. For Israel is a spiritual name that was taken incorrectly to designate a race. You should also know that all who aspire to form part of my people can do so by the means of their love, charity, and their zeal and faithfulness for the law. My people has no fixed lands or cities in the world. My people has no race, but is found among all races throughout humanity. That proportion of mankind that hears my word and receives the new revelations are only a part of my people. Another part is disseminated around the earth, and another, the greatest part, inhabit the spiritual veil. None can discover where that people is, because it shall be everywhere. Its enemies will try to destroy it, but will not be able, for they shall never be gathered physically. Their union, their order, and their harmony shall be spiritual. When these words come to other places, many will mock them. But I tell you that it would be better that they did not mock, for the time will come when they will awaken from their lethargy and know that they too are children of the people of God. These multitudes today that hear me might fall into confusion, and if they do not study my word, and if they do not put off their materialism, the same may happen to them as to the Israelites of the earliest times, who heard the voice of the Lord, received the law, and had prophets, so they came to believe themselves the only people beloved of God, a grave error from which the great trials came to save them, humiliation, exile, and captivity. It is necessary that you know that my love could not segregate you into races and creeds. And when I speak of my people, it is because from the first times I have been preparing spirits to be sent to earth to illuminate the path of humanity. So I hope this video has given you some food for thought on the historicity, biblical roots, and social dynamics shaping the enduring controversy. Whether through ancient sibling rivalries that never fully healed, 19th century inventions of ethnicity, pragmatic historical choices, or these later spiritual teachings calling for humility and inclusivity, the story reminds us how deeply human claims to land and identity intertwine with the questions of mission, justice, and shared humanity. If this helped broaden your perspective, like, subscribe, and share with someone who might appreciate it too. Thanks for watching. Until next time.